So some of the class, apart from I was doing physiology homework all night. Estaba haciendo tareas de fisiología toda la noche. Ahora le toca un poquito de inglés, speech communications. It's a project that I need to read. I need to read this article, but I have to do an article after this. Hopefully, if you guys are interested, you guys can help me out. But I'll read this. So, reading selection, learning to read. Reading selection, learning to read. Excerpt from the autobiography of Malcolm X. Malcolm X. Born Malcolm Little on May 19, 1925, Malcolm X was one of the most articulate and powerful leaders of Black America during the 1960s. A street hustler convicted by robbery in 1946, he spent 7 years in a prison, where he educated himself and became a disciple of Elijah Muhammad, founder of the Nation of Islam. In the days of the Civil Rights Movement, Malcolm X emerged as the leading spokesman for Black separatism, a philosophy that argued Black Americans to cut political, social, and economic ties with the white community. After a pilgrimage to Mecca, the capital of the Muslim world, in 1964, he became an Orthodox Muslim, adopted by the Muslim name El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, and distanced himself from the teachings of Black Muslims. He was assassinated in 1965. In the following excerpt from his autobiography written in 1965, co-authored by Alex Haley and published the year of his death, Malcolm X describes his self-education. It was because of my letters that I happened to stumble upon starting to acquire some kind of homemade education. I became increasingly frustrated at not being able to express what I wanted to convey in letters that I wrote, especially those for Mr. Elijah Muhammad. In the street, I had been the most articulate hustler out there. I had commanded attention when I said something, but now trying to write simple English, I not only wasn't articulate, I wasn't even functional. How would I sound writing in slang? The way I would say it, something such as, "Look, Daddy, let me pull your coat about a cat, Elijah Muhammad." Many who today hear me somewhere in prison or on television, or those who read something I've read, will think I went to school far beyond the 8th grade. This impression is due entirely to my prison studies. It had really begun back in Charlestown prison, when Bimby first made me feel envy of his stock of knowledge. Bimby had always taken charge of any conversations he was in, and I had tried to emulate him. But every book I picked up had few sentences which didn't contain anywhere from one to nearly all of the words that might as well have been in Chinese. When I just skipped those words, of course, I really ended up with little idea of what the book said. So I had come to Norfolk Prison Colony, still going through only book reading motions. Pretty soon, I would have quit even these motions, unless I had received the motivation that I did. I saw that the best thing I could do was to get a hold of a dictionary, to study, to learn some words. I was lucky enough to reason also that I should try to improve my penmanship. It was sad. I couldn't even write in a straight line. It was both ideas together that moved me to request a dictionary along with some tablets and pencils from the Norfolk Prison Colony School. I spent 2 days just rifling uncertainly through the dictionary's pages. I never realized so many words existed. I didn't know which words I needed to learn. Finally, just to start some kind of action, I began copying. In my slow, painstaking, ragged handwriting, I copied into my tablet everything printed on the first page, down to the punctuation marks. Down to the punctuation marks. I believe it took me a day. Then, aloud, I read back to myself everything I'd written on the tablet. Over and over aloud to myself, I read my own handwriting. I woke up the next morning thinking about those words, immensely proud to realize that not only had I written so much at one time, but I'd written words that I never knew were in the world. Moreover, with a little effort, I also could remember what many of these words meant. I reviewed the words whose meanings I didn't remember. Funny thing, from the dictionary's first page right now, that aardvark springs to my that aardvark springs to my mind. The dictionary had a picture of it, a long-tailed, long-eared, burrowing African mammal, which lives off termites caught by sticking out its tongue as an anteater does for ants. I was so fascinated that I went on. I copied the dictionary's next page, and the same experience came when I studied that. With every succeeding page, I also learned of people and places and events from history. Actually, the dictionary is like a miniature encyclopedia. Finally, the dictionary's A section had filled a whole tablet, and I went into the B's. That was the way that I started copying what eventually became the entire dictionary. It went to it went a lot faster after so much practice helped me pick up handwriting speed. Between what I wrote in my tablet and writing letters during the rest of my time in prison, I I would guess I wrote a million words. I suppose it was inevitable that as my word base broadened, I could for the first time pick up a book and now begin to understand what the book was saying. Anyone who has read a great deal can imagine the world that opened. Let me tell you something. From then until I left that prison, in every free moment I had, if I was not reading in the library, I was reading on my bunk. You couldn't have gotten me out of the books with a wedge. Between Mr. Muhammad's teachings, my correspondence, my visitors, usually Ella and Reginald, and my reading of books, months passed without me even thinking about being in prison. In fact, up to then, I never had been truly free in my entire life. The Norfolk Prison Colony's library was in the school's building. A variety of classes was taught by the instructors who came from such places as Harvard and Boston University. The weekly debates between inmate teams were also held in the school building. You would be astonished to know how worked up convicted debaters and audiences would get over subjects like, should babies be fed milk? Available on the prison library shelves were books on just about every general subject. Much of the big private collection that Parkhurst had willed to the prison was still in crates and boxes in the back of the library. Thousands of old books. Some of them looked ancient, covers faded, old tin parchment looking binding. Parkhurst, I've mentioned, seemed to have been principally interested in history and religion. He had the money and the special interest to have a lot of books that you wouldn't have in general circulation. Any college library would have been lucky to get that collection. As you can imagine, especially in a prison where there was heavy emphasis on rehabilitation, an inmate was smiled upon if he demonstrated an unusual intense interest in books. There was a sizable number of well-read inmates, especially the popular debaters. Some were said by many to be particularly practically walking encyclopedias, jeepers, caffeine and lack of sleep. They were almost celebrities. No universities would ask any student to devour literature as I did when this new world opened to me of being able to read and understand. I read more in my room than in the library itself. An inmate who was known to read a lot could check out more than the permitted maximum number of books. I preferred reading in total isolation of my own room. When I had progressed to really serious readings, every night at about 10 p.m., I would be outraged with the lights out. It always seemed to catch me right in the middle of something engrossing. Fortunately, right outside my door was a corridor light that cast a glow into my room. The glow was enough to read by once my eyes adjusted to it. So when lights out came, I would sit on the floor where I could continue reading in that glow. At an hour intervals, the night guards placed past every room. At hour intervals, the night guards paced past every room. Each time I heard the approaching footsteps, I jumped into bed and feigned sleep. And as soon as the guard passed, I got back out of bed into the floor area out of the light glow where I would read for another 58 minutes until the guard approached again. What that went on till 3 or 4 every morning. 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night was enough for me. Often in the years in the streets, I had slept less than that. The teachings of Mr. Muhammad stressed how history had been widened. When white men had written history books and black men simply had been left out, I never will forget how shocked I was when I began reading about slavery's total horror. It made such an impact upon me that it later became one of my favorite subjects when I became a minister of Mr. Muhammad's. The world's most monstrous crime, the sin and the blood of the white man's hand, are almost impossible to believe. I read descriptions of atrocities, saw those illustrations of black slave women tied up and flogged with whips, a black mother watching their babies being dragged off, never to be seen by their mothers again, of dogs after slaves, and of fugitive slave catchers, evil white men with whips and clubs and chains and guns. Book after book showed me how the white man had brought upon the world's black, brown, red, and yellow people every variety of sufferings of exploitation. I saw how since the 16th century, the so-called Christian trader, white man, began to ply the seas in his lust for Asian and African empires and plunder and power. I saw how the white man never has gone among the non-white people bearing the cross in the true manner and the spirit of Christ's teachings, meek, humble, and Christ-like. I have often reflected upon the new vistas that reading upon opened to me. I knew right there in prison that reading had changed forever the course of my life, as I see it today. The ability to read awoke inside me some long dormant craving to be mentally alive. I certainly wasn't seeking any degree. The way of college confers a status symbol upon its students. My homemade education gave me, with every additional book that I read, a little bit more sensitivity to the deafness, dumbness, and blindness that was afflicting the black race in America. Not long ago, an English writer telephoned me from London asking me questions. One was, "What's your alma mater?" I told him, "Books." You will never catch me with a free 15 minutes in which I am not studying something I feel might be able to help man. Mr. Malcom X.